Hello. Today I return once more to the Hindenburg, which at this point is probably, well, it is my single most played cruiser, not just tier 10, but in general my most played cruiser. And as some of you are aware, I have been testing the range mod for a fair amount of time on it, honestly. And honestly, with the way the passive meta looks these days, with how much sitting back and sniping and camping there generally seems to be in the game, and how hard it is to actually push up these days, it used to be a lot easier to play more aggressive, but with the overall passivity of the game, I've honestly found that playing with the range mod has ultimately turned out to be more successful than playing with the reload mod. This is a bit of a shame because the Hindenburg was pretty much the last ship I ran the reload mod on. I've been changing it one by one. It used to be just the Zhao and the Des Moines that I ran reload on, but now I've changed that so that the only thing I run reload mod on these days is the Minotaur, and that one has smoke to make up for the lack of range. So even on the Moskva I switched to the range mod, and now even on the Hindenburg I have permanently switched to the range mod. The problem is, of course, well, if the AP on the ship was more powerful, more reliable, then perhaps reload might still have a place, but considering at long ranges HE is so much more reliable than the AP, because the AP tends to bounce and break at long ranges a fair amount, so you end up using the HE a fair amount. Especially with Demolition Expert and Flags, you can reach 18% fire chance on the HE, which, because of the buffed HE, well, it was buffed a good while ago, but means it's actually a very reliable tool of dealing damage. So having this additional range, being able to harass these Grosse Corfos that are pushing in without having to put yourself at risk, the same way you have to put yourself at risk with the reload mod, has ultimately proved to be significantly more useful and just significantly more reliable. The passivity of the game is of course one of the main reasons for this change. When there was more aggressive meta, running the reload mod was significantly more useful, of course, because when you get into any sort of close combat fights, well, of course the reload mod is naturally going to be better for obvious reasons. Turret traverse isn't an issue, so giving up that 12% turret traverse is no big deal. Gaining instead that 13% reload is much better, or what was it, 12 and 13 the other way around. Regardless, it just seems much smoother to run the range mod these days, and that's mostly because, well, the passivity has kind of forced me to adapt to using a significantly more HE than I did in the past, which is not really the role I've been hoping for the Hindenburg for a long time. For a long time I've been hoping they would just nerf the HE and instead give the AP significantly more penetration. So basically if they made the AP reliable on the ship so that you wouldn't have to rely on the HE as much as you do now, I feel like the ship would be much more fun to play, much more reliable, and perhaps the reload mod would be more of an option as well, in case they, for example, made it less reliable on long ranges and forced you to push up. I wouldn't mind being forced to push up if when I pushed up I was instead rewarded with reliable AP damage, but at this point there is little point in pushing up when you can sit in range and use HE most of the time. Of course there are exceptions, squishy cruisers giving broadside like this Mogami for example. I'll still switch to AP for these targets and I'll still be able to citadel them at these ranges, but these are more of exceptions than rules. And of course if a battleship gives you perfect broadside and he doesn't maneuver too much, some good superstructure hits still give you good damage, but ultimately HE is just so strong because of the high fire chance, and it allows you to remain at a better distance. You see here, as soon as I push into this range where the reload mod would be better, you see how much focus I'm taking. All this battleship, the Zhao, everyone is starting to fire at me, and well, that's because my team decided to lemming train down the other side, and on this side of course my carrier is mostly AFK. And this huge amount of damage that I'm suddenly taking, that it kind of proves my point. As soon as the distance becomes shorter. It becomes so much harder to avoid this damage, and when you're facing multiple battleships, which is very common to face these days because, well, it is a battleship meta right now. Battleships are extraordinarily strong, and the upcoming 0.6.0 patch seems to be buffing battleships even more, so this is unlikely to change anytime soon. And it's because, having seen both the old 0.6.0 skills and the updated ones, it's fairly obvious that battleships are not going to lose any popularity at all. In fact, they'll probably become even more popular. So because of this, I have absolutely no issues recommending going for this range mod instead. Now, of course, these are the kind of situations, like at this range, reload mod would gain me better damage, and at these ranges you can do fairly good damage to corrosive code force and such when they give you a broadside. That hasn't changed. The problem is, though, that you don't really want to be at these ranges because with all these battleships shooting at you, you just end up taking so much damage that you ultimately would rather create some more distance between you and your targets and get some HE and fire started. The Hakurio, by the way, in case you were wondering, the Hakurio on my team is a bot, most likely. He started the game, he spawned all his planes, but he never gave them any order, and he never moved or anything, he's just been sitting there. So this game has turned out to be very, very tough. You can see we're already down 3 ships, and of course the biggest problem here is that we have no Hakurio, whereas the enemy has a Hakurio on their side. So we are at a significant disadvantage. And it's especially in games like this when you're forced to retreat, you're forced to back off, you're forced to kite, when I find the range mod and a heavily HE focused build is just so much stronger than the reload mod, because it allows you to continually dish out damage while kiting, unlike for example the Des Moines that can move away at very steep angle while still dealing damage. The Hindenburg has pretty good firing angles, but really you still have to give a nice chunk of broadside, and when you're forced to give this broadside, being able to stay at a comfortable distance to avoid the worst of the damage is preferable. Hence why, especially in situations like this, of course the range mod just shines. Of course, Demolition Expert is something I've been recommending for a while, even back when I used the reload mod, but it synergizes even better with the range mod because, well, it allows you to remain effective at massive distances, which because of battleships is a pretty much must-have. It's sad, but that's just the way it goes. I mean, I look down at the screen and all I tend to see is battleships, and if I don't see battleships, then I see cruisers with extreme ranges for example Sao, who in return would stealth fire me. And when you can land volleys like that where you do 45k HE damage and you start 2 fires on top of it at like 18-19 kilometers, it's very hard to argue that you should be using AP or reload mod, because the HE just seems like a more consistent source of damage. My team is still dying. Me and Wistcast are, however, doing our best. Of course, there's another reason why the HE and long range kind of synergizes better is, of course, I have a Khabarovsk on my team, Wistcast, and he's obviously also kiting away and spamming HE while kiting away. So we are both forcing repairs and both starting fires, and the synergy between this is quite strong, as opposed to if I was shooting AP, then he would be alone in the starting the fires and so forth. So we are faster at burning down ships, especially when it's pretty much us two against their entire fleet. Some of them are starting to turn around to deal with our team, who has been pushing up in their flank, but we are still pretty heavily outnumbered here. Of course, there are still situations where I find myself missing the reload mod. I mean, anyone who has used the reload mod knows that having that 1 or 2 seconds shaved off the reload feels, when you get used to it, it feels so much more comfortable, but it's a trade-off that's well worth it. It's just a trade-off that's well worth it. That's all it comes down to. When you are very low HP and you're still able to remain effective at long ranges, or when you're facing against multiple T10 battleships and you're not afraid to fire because you're so close that you might get wrecked, that's when you really start appreciating this advantage it gives. Amagi, it looks like he repaired, so of course I keep shooting HE at him. Khabarovsk sets 1 fire on him. He's still repairing though. I set another fire on him. See, this is exactly what I mean. Also the synergy that you have. I mean, you can switch to AP at any time if you want, but this synergy between shooting HE and of course the damage, the sheer damage. I don't really understand why they even buffed the HE on the ship to begin with, when the number one complaint, at least I know of, my number one complaint, and as far as I know of, the number one complaint most Hindenburg players was the unreliable AP. And instead of making the AP more reliable, they buffed the HE. So, and now they say they don't want as much long-range HE spam. But I mean, they are pretty much the ones who created this problem. If they keep buffing the HE, why do they expect people would keep using the AP? It doesn't really make much sense. Of course, there are still, this is one of those situations, having the reload mod here would be fantastic when Zhao's pushing in like this. But ultimately, it's not like it's that big of a loss. And of course, if you got Potato Zhao's giving you this much broadside when well, it's not really much of a fight, is it? Amagi gives me so much broadside that AP works just fine against him as well. Looks like the fire ran out and he's still alive. Finishing him off and keeping myself angled against the Amagi and pushing in on him right now. Still being set, last volley of the Zhao set me on fire. Let's see, can I kill him? See, bouncing shells, and ultimately my issue here is that even though I can deal, you see 3 bounces, with a tier 8 battleship just angled this much, my AP is already unreliable. It already starts bouncing. So why on earth would I not switch to my HE, which at this point is significantly more reliable, and I know it will get the job done. And of course there's also a chance that I might start a fire or two, which will help me even further. And that's of course the key problem with the Hindenburg. The AP is simply unreliable. The Moskva and, well, honestly, none of the other cruisers really have this issue with the unreliable AP, and it is still a significant weakness of the Hindenburg. In fact, it is still the reason why I probably consider the Hindenburg the weakest tier 10 cruiser. People ask me which one is my favorite cruiser, and I'd probably say it would be the Hindenburg as well. I love this ship, and I love the fact that it's quite challenging to be as successful in as the other cruisers. But ultimately, when it comes to straight up competitiveness, it doesn't really have, it doesn't really get close to the other ones, like Minotaur, massive DPM, smoke, so forth, and Moskva Des Moines, they both had their radar. Zhao, fantastic stealth firing ability, and it's got both great HE and great AP. So the Hindenburg doesn't really have that niche. I mean, using this build on it, you kind of compete with the Zhao mostly. In the fact that you are able to start fires from long range, but you're not really stealth firing, so you're not really infringing on his territory. And ultimately, even though you have 12k more HP, it's pretty sketchy which one of you are actually tankier, because Zhao's armor is quite trollish, and of course Zhao's stealth is nothing to joke about. So I still think the Hindenburg is by far the weakest tier 10 cruiser. It's probably my most played for that reason. In fact, I tend to enjoy these ships. In fact, if you look at my most played ships, my most played battleship is the Montana, which I also consider the weakest tier 10 battleship. And my most played DD, well, before the Z-52, was the Shimakaze, which from a competitive point of view is probably also the weakest, but I never considered any of those strictly uncompetitive. I mean, well, the Shimakaze I didn't. The Montana, I would say, is probably one of the few that just suffers quite heavily right now, and it's simply just not fun because of the situation it is in. And the Hindenburg kind of fits in with the Shimakaze, that I still think it's fun to play. I still think it's an enjoyable ship, and it's fairly competitive, but it simply lacks that edge that you have in the other ships. And that's pretty much, well, that's kind of what it shares with the Shimakaze. It just lacks that edge, it lacks that special something that makes it so strong. With the reload mod, well, you had the AP damage at close range, but that requires you to be close range, and getting close range with someone is a lot harder than said, with the way the current meta has been evolving to more and more passive play, and with things like RPF being added, well, hello, passive play is just going to get significantly worse. I mean, these situations, when you get broadside on battleship, yeah, you do good damage, but then again, if I was Des Moines or Zhao or Moskva, I'd probably be citadeling him, and that's no joke. Moskva would guaranteed be citadeling him. Des Moines, probably. Zhao, probably. So, whenever you deal this great damage, you gotta take into account just how much damage the other cruisers might do. Regardless, the game ended 202k damage, and we managed to carry it, considering we had an AFK carrier, and overall, quite a hard game. Team XP or base XP wise, 2.5k, which is always nice considering it was a fairly high tier game. And I mean, I felt like this game showed just how strong. You look at my potential damage, it's 2.2 million, and I tanked 61k damage in this game, but I never really felt like I was in too much of a trouble, trouble because I had that additional range to work as a buffer between me and the enemy, to keep me safe, to keep me at the distance, to never really put me in too much. Like, I was never in a risky situation. I could always disengage whenever I felt like it, and that's really what the range mod gives you. It's this ability to, if the things get tough, if things get hard, you can pretty easily just stop firing and slip into stealth, and you can disengage whenever you want. And I think that's ultimately one of the great strengths of running the range mod over the stealth or the reload mod, is that it gives you more options. And with this passive meta, you really want those options. Anyway, let's move on to the captain build. Now, I haven't really changed much when it comes to my captain build. I still run, well, of course, recommend premium repair and premium heal, and I still run pretty much exactly the same things, but of course, anytime I change my build, I always update it and go over it. Hydroacoustic or defensive AA, you can run either one depending on what you're facing. Both are fantastic. Main armaments mod 1, AA range mod 2, because you're not running AFT with this build. You want something to increase the range of this to somewhat decent levels. With that, if you run neither AFT or this range mod, then your AA is pretty much a joke. Gunfire control system, meaning additional range. Damage control mod 1, because you lose neither rudder or engine that much, and of course rudder shift and stealth. Captain perks wise, basics of survivability, expert marksman, and superintendent, demolition expert, and finally of course concealment expert. And this HE chance, of course, and of course vigilance. HE chance, as mentioned, of course, synergizes so well with the additional range. You've seen my upcoming 0.6.0, most likely usable build. I might have to update it later. We'll see about that. Regardless, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.